The laughter echoed around the room, but it wasn't the good kind, the kind that warms your chest. No, this laughter had sharp edges. It was my father's voice booming above the others, telling them how useless and soft I was. I stood there, holding a cheap glass of wine, my cheeks burning, wondering how the man who once carried me on his shoulders could now tear me down without a second thought. And then, get this, she calls me saying she needs to move back home because her startup failed. Again. My father, Richard Carter, took another swig of his beer, the foam catching in his salt and pepper mustache. How many tries is that now, Millionaire? 4? 5? I've lost count. Our backyard was packed with family for the annual 4th of July barbecue. Red, white, and blue streamers hung limply in the humid Missouri air. The smell of charcoal and overcooked hot dogs mingled with the scent of cheap beer and drugstore sunscreen. My cousins, uncles, aunts, and neighbors all turned to look at me, their expressions varying from amused pity to outright mockery. Dad, it was just one startup, and the investor pulled out at the last. My voice cracked. Investors? He howled, slapping his knee. Listen to her talking about investors like she's on that TV show. What was it called? Shark Tank. He turned to my Uncle Phil. She thinks she's some big shot entrepreneur, but can't even keep a regular job for more than 6 months. He shook his head dramatically. Her mother and I didn't raise her to have her head in the clouds like this. Real Carters work steady jobs, save their money, and don't chase pipe dreams. I felt something shrivel inside me. At 29, I shouldn't care what my father thought. Yet here I was in a sundress I'd splurged on specifically for this gathering, hoping stupidly that this time would be different. That maybe, just maybe, I'd finally earn an approving nod from Richard Carter. My cousin Megan snickered behind her hand. She'd gone the safe route. Nursing school, marriage to her high school sweetheart, 2 kids by 26. In my father's eyes, she was the gold standard. The perfect example of what a young woman should be. It's not like you don't have options, sweetie, my Aunt Claire chimed in, her voice syrupy with false concern. Megan says they're always looking for administrative assistants at the hospital. No shame in starting at the bottom. I'm not looking for administrative work, I said, my voice sounding small even to my own ears. I'm actually working on a new business concept. It's an e-commerce platform that... E-commerce? My father bellowed. Just say selling junk online, like a normal person. Always trying to sound smarter than you are. More laughter. Someone patted my shoulder sympathetically as they passed by to grab another burger. My mother appeared at my side, her face tight with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Richard, honey, maybe that's enough. Come help me bring out the desserts. But he was on a roll now, holding court with his audience. You know what her problem is? Too soft. Always has been. Remember when she quit the softball team because the coach yelled at her? Or that time she cried over that C+ in calculus? The real world eats girls like her alive. I stood frozen, the wine in my glass vibrating with the slight tremor in my hand. 20 years of this, of never measuring up, of being the family punchline. Every accomplishment dismissed, every failure magnified. Well, my father continued, at least she's back home now where we can keep an eye on her latest genius idea. He made air quotes with his fingers. Until it falls apart like all the others. Something snapped inside me, a fragile thing I'd been nursing for years. In its place, a cold, hard resolution formed. I set my wine glass down carefully, deliberately. I walked through the crowd, past my smirking cousins, past Uncle Phil, who was already launching into his own story about his son's success at the car dealership. No one noticed me slip away, they rarely did. In my childhood bedroom, surrounded by participation trophies my father had always sneered at and outdated posters I'd never bothered to take down, I sat on the edge of my bed and made a promise to myself. One day, they'll choke on those laughs. The thought should have scared me, its intensity, its darkness. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing I'd acknowledged in years. I pulled out my phone and texted my friend Zoe. I need a place to crash. Tonight. No, I'm not okay. But I will be. Earth to Millionaire. Zoe snapped her fingers in front of my face, jolting me from my thoughts. You've been staring at that laptop screen for 3 hours straight. It's almost midnight. I blinked, the glow of the screen having burned temporary spots into my vision. Zoe's apartment was small but immaculate, all clean lines and minimalist decor, a stark contrast to the cluttered, memorabilia-filled home I'd fled a month ago. Sorry, I mumbled, reaching for the cold coffee beside me. Just trying to finish this business model canvas. Zoe leaned against the kitchen counter, her dark curls piled on top of her head, arms crossed over her faded university sweatshirt. You know, when I offered you my sofa bed, I didn't expect you to transform it into mission control. You barely sleep. I'll sleep when I figured this out. I gestured to the spreadsheets and market research documents scattered across my makeshift workspace. Figure what out exactly? How to prove your dad wrong or how to actually build something meaningful. I looked up sharply. Can't it be both? Zoe sighed, sliding onto the sofa beside me. Look, Mal. I've known you since freshman year. I've watched you chase your father's approval through 3 different majors in 4 career paths. When does it end? The truth stung. Each of my previous ventures had been, at least in part, attempts to impress my father. The graphic design business I'd started after college? Because he'd once commented that my artistic hobby would never pay bills. The app I tried to develop? Because he'd scoffed that technology was where the real money was, not that I'd ever figure it out. Each time, I'd worked myself to exhaustion, desperate for him to finally say, I'm proud of you. Each time I failed. It ends now, I said quietly. I'm done trying to impress him. You say that, but No, I mean it. I closed my laptop. That night at the barbecue, something changed. I realized I've been chasing the wrong thing. I don't need his approval. I need to prove something to myself. Zoe studied my face, searching for the truth. And what's that? That I'm not what he says I am. That I can build something real, something lasting. I hesitated. And yes, something that will make him eat his words someday. She nodded slowly. Okay. I can get behind that. But you need a real plan this time, not just passion and dreams. She gestured at my chaotic notes. What are you actually working on? I took a deep breath. This was the first time I'd voiced my idea aloud. Remember how I was always fixing and reselling vintage clothes in college? How I could spot quality from a mile away? You funded our spring break trip to Miami by flipping that collection of designer jackets, Zoe recalled. You've always had an eye. Right. So I've been researching the luxury consignment market. It's fragmented and efficient. The big players focus on the obvious brands, but there's a massive untapped market for curated, authenticated mid-tier luxury. I turned my laptop toward her, showing the marketplace concept I'd been designing. People want quality but can't always afford the big names. And those who bought quality pieces want a trusted place to resell them. Zoe leaned forward, suddenly interested. So what, an online consignment shop? More than that. A platform that authenticates, photographs, stores, and ships. The consignor just sends it to us. We handle everything else for a cut. But the special sauce is the curation. We don't take everything. We build a reputation for having the best of the best, even from brands people might not immediately recognize. Zoe scrolled through my mock-ups. You'd need capital, inventory management, authentication expertise. I know. That's why I've been up all night. I'm applying for that business accelerator program downtown. The application's due tomorrow. I rubbed my eyes. I've got $3,000 saved. If I get in, they provide $10,000 in seed funding and 3 months of mentorship. Zoe was quiet for a moment, then stood up and walked to her bedroom. She returned with a checkbook. Make it $5,000 saved. Consider it an investment, not a loan. Zoe, I can't. Yes, you can. Because this is the first time I've heard you talk about a business idea that sounds like it came from you, not from what you think will impress your father. She wrote out the check. Besides, I want founding investor bragging rights when this takes off. I felt tears well up. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we're sipping champagne in the office of what are you calling this venture anyway? I smiled. Phoenix Closet. Because it's about beautiful things rising from the ashes. A bit on the nose, don't you think? Zoe teased, but she was smiling too. Maybe I admitted. But it feels right. That night, after Zoe went to bed, I stayed up finishing my application. Before I hit submit, I pulled out my phone and found the photo my cousin had posted from the 4th of July barbecue. In it, my father was mid-laugh, pointing in my direction, while I stood at the edge of the frame, face flushed with humiliation. I set the photo as my laptop background. Not out of masochism, but as a reminder. Every time I wanted to quit, every time doubt crept in, I would look at it and remember why I started. I hit submit on my application, then fell into an exhausted sleep, the first real rest I'd had since that fateful barbecue. In my dreams, I was soaring above the ashes of my past failures, my wings outstretched and powerful. The interest rate is higher than standard because you have limited credit history and no collateral, the loan officer explained, sliding the paperwork across his immaculate desk. His tie was too tight, his smile too practiced. 15%. It's the best we can do. I swallowed hard, staring at the number. $10,000. Combined with Zoe's investment in my savings, it would be just enough to launch Phoenix Closet properly, with professional photography equipment, a small inventory of seed items I'd sourced, and 3 months of operating costs. But 15% interest? It was predatory. It was desperate. It was my only option. I understand, I said, reaching for the pen. I'll make it work. 6 months had passed since I'd been accepted into the Business Accelerator program. 3 months of intensive training, mentorship, and pitch refinement. 3 more months of grinding, building out the platform, making connections with consignors, and creating a brand from scratch. And now this loan, my final roll of the dice. Miss Carter. The loan officer cleared his throat as I signed my name. I feel obligated to warn you that the failure rate for new businesses, especially in e-commerce, is quite high. If this venture doesn't succeed, it will, I interrupted, meeting his eyes. I appreciate your concern, but failure isn't an option I'm considering. He looked surprised, then impressed. Well then, the funds will be in your account by end of business tomorrow. Outside the bank, I leaned against the building's stone facade, letting out a shaky breath. The September air had a crisp edge to it, a hint of the coming fall. I'd risked everything, my savings, my friends' trust, and now my financial future with this high-interest loan. If Phoenix Closet failed, I'd be worse than broke. I'd be broken. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Your cousin Megan's having a baby shower next month. Please say you'll come. Your father misses you. I scoffed. Richard Carter didn't miss me. He missed having a convenient target. We hadn't spoken since July, though my mother called weekly with increasingly desperate attempts to broker peace. I texted back, can't make it. Working. Give her my best. Then I turned my phone off and walked to the small office space I'd leased, a former storage room above a coffee shop downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but the rent was cheap and the location central. Inside, cardboard boxes lined the walls, inventory waiting to be photographed, authenticated, and listed. My desk was a repurposed door balanced on filing cabinets. My photography studio consisted of a white sheet pinned to the wall and professional lights I bought used from a photography student. But it was mine. All mine. I booted up my laptop, the screen illuminating the photograph from the barbecue that still served as my background. 6 months later, it still made my stomach clench, but now that reaction was fuel. Okay, Phoenix, I muttered to myself, opening the inventory spreadsheet. Time to rise. The next 3 months were a blur of 18-hour days. I taught myself product photography through YouTube tutorials. I built relationships with consignors, personally picking up items from wealthy women looking to clear closet space. I wrote every product description myself, researched every brand to ensure authenticity, and packed every shipment with handwritten thank you notes. At night, I slept on a futon in the office, too exhausted to make the trip back to the apartment I now shared with Zoe and another roommate. My diet consisted of coffee shop leftovers and protein bars. My social life evaporated. But slowly, agonizingly, Phoenix Closet began to breathe. The first month, we made 3 sales. The second month, 12. By the third month, we were averaging 2 sales per day, not enough to break even, but enough to suggest there was something viable in my vision. Then disaster struck. What do you mean they're all fake? I stared at Louisa, the authentication expert I'd hired on contract to verify a new collection of handbags. She spread the 5 bags on the table, pointing out the telltale signs. These are sophisticated counterfeits, but counterfeits nonetheless. The stitching here, the hardware quality, they're wrong. Whoever sold these to you knew what they were doing. My heart sank. I paid nearly $4,000 for this collection from a woman who claimed they were authentic pieces she'd inherited from her grandmother. $4,000 I couldn't afford to lose. If you'd sold these as authentic, it could have destroyed your reputation, Louisa continued. Not to mention opened you up to lawsuits. I sank into my chair, head in my hands. The loan payment was due next week. I was already eating into my rent money to cover operating costs. This loss could be the final nail in Phoenix Closet's coffin. What do I do? I whispered, more to myself than to Louisa. She hesitated. You could try to resell them. Not as authentic, of course, but no. I stood up abruptly. No, I won't build this business on lies. Not even small ones. After she left, I sat alone in the darkening office, staring at the counterfeit bags. I thought about calling Zoe, asking for another loan. I thought about crawling back to my parents' house, tail between my legs, proving my father right once again. Instead, I reached for my phone and pulled up a number I'd been saving for an emergency. 3 rings, then. Marcus Grant speaking. Marcus had been a mentor from the Accelerator program, a successful entrepreneur who'd built and sold 3 companies before 40. He'd taken an interest in Phoenix Closet, had seen something in my vision that others hadn't. Marcus, it's Melania Carter. I need advice. My voice was steady despite the desperation churning in my stomach. And possibly a miracle. 2 hours later, we sat in his sleek downtown office, the counterfeit bag spread between us. So you're out $4,000 with a loan payment due and inventory that's worthless, he summarized, leaning back in his chair. That's the situation. He studied me carefully. Most new entrepreneurs would be in tears right now. Or looking for shortcuts. I met his gaze. I'm not most entrepreneurs. No, he agreed. You're not. Which is why I'm going to make you an offer. He slid a checkbook from his desk drawer. $15,000. Enough to cover your loss and give you runway for 2 more months. I blinked. As a loan? As an investment? 10% equity in Phoenix Closet. My breath caught. That values the company at $150,000. I'm valuing you, Melania. The company's just an extension. He wrote out the check. I've mentored dozens of startups. The ones that succeed aren't always the ones with the best ideas. They're the ones with leaders who face disaster without flinching. He nodded toward the counterfeit bags. Most people would have panicked, cut corners, compromised. You didn't. I accepted the check with trembling hands. I won't let you down. I know you won't. He stood, signaling the end of our meeting. Oh, and I've emailed you contact information for a former FBI forensic specialist who consults on authentication. She's expensive but worth every penny. No more counterfeit crises. As I walked back to my office, the check secure in my bag, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not just the desperate hope that had kept me going, but real, substantial hope built on validation from someone who knew what they were talking about. That night, I didn't work late for once. Instead, I went back to my apartment, took a long shower, and slept in my actual bed. Before I fell asleep, I changed my laptop background from the barbecue photo to Phoenix Closet's logo. I was done letting my father's mockery define me. It was time to define myself. Melania? This is Vanessa Woodward from Style Life magazine. I'm calling about the vintage Halston collection you have listed. I nearly dropped my phone. Style Life wasn't Vogue, but it was respectable, a growing digital publication focused on sustainable fashion and emerging designers. I'd sent them press releases about Phoenix Closet twice, with no response. Yes, of course, I replied, trying to sound calm and professional rather than shocked. Are you interested in the 1970s pieces? Actually, we're doing a feature on luxury consignment sites with unique curation, and your collection caught my eye. The authentication process you describe on your website is impressive. Thank you, Marcus, and your FBI contact, I thought silently. Would you be available for an interview next week? We'd also like to photograph some of your inventory for the piece. I glanced around my humble office. The photography setup had improved. I'd invested in proper lighting and backgrounds, but it was hardly the sleek, minimalist showroom I'd envisioned. We could meet at your office, Vanessa continued, or somewhere that showcases your aesthetic. Actually, I said, an idea forming, I have the perfect location in mind. 1 week later, I stood in the bright, airy loft of a friend's downtown art gallery. She'd agreed to let me use the space for the interview in exchange for social media cross-promotion. I transformed a corner of the gallery into a Phoenix Closet pop-up display, with our most beautiful pieces arranged on elegant racks and pedestals borrowed from another friend in visual merchandising. When Vanessa arrived with the photographer, her eyebrows rose appreciatively. This is gorgeous. Very on brand. The interview went better than I could have hoped. Vanessa was genuinely interested in my authentication process, my curation philosophy, and the stories behind specific pieces. The photographer captured everything: the clothing, the space, and me discussing the items with the natural passion that had driven me since college. One last question, Vanessa said as the photographer packed up. What inspired you to start Phoenix Closet? There are plenty of consignment platforms out there. I hesitated, thinking of the real answer: humiliation, revenge, desperation. But those weren't the only reasons anymore. I believe beautiful, well-made things deserve second lives, I said instead. And I believe everyone deserves access to quality, regardless of budget or brand recognition. Phoenix Closet isn't just about reselling luxury items, it's about democratizing quality. Vanessa nodded approvingly. That's a mission statement worth printing. She handed me her card. The feature will run next month. We'll send you a link. After she left, I collapsed onto a gallery bench, exhausted but elated. A feature in a real publication, it was more visibility than I'd dared hope for at this stage. I texted Zoe. Just finished interview with Style Life. They're featuring Phoenix. Her response was immediate. OMG. Drinks tonight. No excuses. For once I didn't argue. 9 months of nonstop work had earned me one night of celebration. That evening at a rooftop bar downtown, Zoe raised her glass. To Phoenix Closet's first media feature. We clinked glasses and I took a sip of champagne, actual champagne, not the cheap sparkling wine of my struggling student days. It felt symbolic somehow. So what happens now? Zoe asked, setting her glass down. After the feature runs? Hopefully traffic. Sales. I gazed out at the city lights. I've been working on scalability, streamlining the intake process, building relationships with more consignors. If the feature generates the interest I'm hoping for, we need to be ready. Zoe studied me. You know you look different. I've lost weight, I admitted. Too much coffee, not enough real food. No, it's not that. She tilted her head. You carry yourself differently. Like you're finally comfortable in your own skin. I considered this. She wasn't wrong. Somewhere in the chaos of the past 9 months, between the crushing lows and scattered victories, I'd stopped worrying about what my father thought of me. I'd stopped measuring my worth against his impossible standards. I am different, I acknowledged. For the first time, I'm building something because I believe in it, not because I'm trying to prove a point. And how's that working out for you? I smiled. Better than anything I've ever done. The Style Life feature ran the following month, and the effect was immediate and dramatic. Traffic to the Phoenix Closet website increased by 400%. Sales tripled overnight. My inbox flooded with consignment requests and authentication inquiries. I hired 2 part-time employees, a photography assistant and a shipping manager. I moved the operation to a proper office space with a showroom area. I started sleeping in my apartment again, though the hours remained long. By the 1-year anniversary of Phoenix Closet's launch, we were profitable. Not wildly so, but enough that I could pay myself a modest salary and start repaying Zoe's initial investment with interest. Marcus was impressed with the growth trajectory. You've got something special here, he said during our quarterly review. You found a niche that the big players overlooked, authentication as a primary value proposition rather than an afterthought. But the most surreal moment came when my phone rang one afternoon, displaying my mother's number. I'd maintained minimal contact, begging off family gatherings with work excuses. Millionaire? Her voice sounded different, tentative, almost odd. I just saw you. In a magazine. At my hair salon. I froze. The Style Life feature had led to others, a small write-up in a local business journal, a mention in a sustainable fashion blog. But nothing my mother would see at a suburban hair salon. What magazine? I asked cautiously. People. There was an article about sustainable fashion and they mentioned your website. There was a picture and everything. People magazine. With a circulation in the millions. Did he? I swallowed hard. Did Dad see it? A pause. Not yet. But Millionaire, honey, this is wonderful. We had no idea you were doing so well. Your father will be so proud. The words I'd once desperately wanted to hear now rang hollow. I didn't need Richard Carter's pride anymore. I had my own. Tell him I said hello, I said simply. I have to go now, busy day. After we hung up, I sat staring at my phone, a complex mix of emotions swirling through me. Triumph, vindication, but also a strange emptiness where my need for approval had once lived. That evening, as I walked through the Phoenix Closet showroom, my showroom, I realized something important. I was no longer building this company to prove my father wrong. I was building it because I loved it, because it mattered to me, because it was genuinely successful on its own merits. The revenge that had once motivated me now seemed small compared to what I'd created. I opened my laptop, found the barbecue photo that I'd long since removed as my background, and deleted it permanently. I didn't need that fuel anymore. Phoenix Closet wasn't rising from those particular ashes any longer, it was soaring on its own wings. 3 years later. Miss Carter, they're ready for you in the main conference room. I glanced up from my tablet to see my executive assistant, James, standing in the doorway of my office. He looked immaculate as always in his charcoal suit, a Phoenix Closet logo pin on his lapel. Thanks, James. Tell them I'll be there in 5. He nodded and disappeared, closing the door behind him. I took a deep breath, centering myself before what promised to be an intense meeting. I stood and smoothed down my dress, a vintage Armani I'd kept from our very first collection, a reminder of how far we'd come. My office reflected that journey. No longer a repurposed storage room, it occupied the corner of our headquarters, a renovated warehouse in the Arts District with 30 employees, a state-of-the-art photography studio, an authentication lab, and a showroom that had been featured in architectural magazines. Phoenix Closet had evolved from a simple consignment platform into an authentication empire. We'd launched Phoenix Certified, a third-party authentication service that other resellers and even auction houses used. We'd developed proprietary authentication technology that combined AI image recognition with human expertise. We'd expanded into luxury watches, fine art, and even collectible sneakers. Last year's revenue, $12 million. Projected for this year, $18 million. And today, I was meeting with representatives from Authentic Luxury Group, a multinational conglomerate interested in acquiring Phoenix Closet for a sum that still made me dizzy when I thought about it. $100 million. I walked from my office to the conference room, nodding at employees along the way. Some had been with me almost from the beginning. Others were recent hires, experts in their fields who had chosen Phoenix over more established companies because they believed in our mission. In the conference room, 5 people in expensive suits stood as I entered. Handshakes, introductions, pleasantries. I recognized Harrison Wells, ALG's acquisition specialist, from our previous meetings. Millionaire, he said warmly, we've just been admiring your operation. Very impressive for such a young company. Thank you, I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. We're proud of what we've built. As you should be. Your authentication protocols in particular are exceptional, years ahead of your competitors. He opened a sleek leather portfolio, which is why we're prepared to improve on our initial offer. He slid a document across the table. I glanced down, maintaining a neutral expression despite the number that practically leapt off the page. $120 million. We've also revised the terms regarding your continued involvement, Harrison continued. 5 years as Chief Authentication Officer for the entire ALG portfolio, with autonomy over the Phoenix division. I nodded slowly, processing. It was more than generous, it was life-changing. Not just for me, but for my early investors like Zoe and Marcus, who would see returns beyond their wildest expectations. For my employees whose stock options would suddenly be worth small fortunes. I'll need to discuss this with my board and advisors, I said, gathering the paperwork. We should have an answer for you by the end of the week. More handshakes, more pleasantries, and they were gone, leaving me alone with a decision that would transform my life. Later that evening, I sat on the balcony of my downtown penthouse apartment, nursing a glass of wine as the sun set over the city. My phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Well, what did they offer? I typed back, 120 M. 5 years contract for me as CEO. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, holy fucking shit. I smiled despite the churning in my stomach. At 32, I was on the verge of becoming wealthy beyond anything I'd imagined when I started Phoenix Closet. The scared, humiliated woman standing at that barbecue seemed like a different person, someone I'd read about in a novel rather than my former self. My phone rang. My mother's number. We spoke more regularly now, brief, cautious conversations. She'd visited the Phoenix offices once, her eyes wide with astonishment at what I'd built. My father had never come. Hi, Mom, I answered. Millionaire, honey. Her voice had the forced cheerfulness I'd come to recognize as her trying to stay calm tone. I need to tell you something and I need you not to hang up. My hand tightened on the wine glass. What's wrong? It's your father. She took a shaky breath. The dealership is failing. He's been trying to keep it afloat, but with the recession and the changes in the industry. Honey, we're going to lose the house. The news should have brought satisfaction, vindication that my father's mockery had come full circle. Instead, I felt oddly hollow. I'm sorry to hear that, I said carefully. How bad is it? Bad? Her voice cracked. The bank's foreclosing next month. We've looked at apartments, but even those. She trailed off. I hate to ask, but is there any way you could help? Just a loan to get us through until he can sell the business? I know you and your father have your differences, but I'll think about it, I interrupted, not wanting to commit either way in the moment. I need to go now, Mom. I'll call you back soon. After we hung up, I sat motionless, watching the city lights flicker on as darkness fell. My father's business, Carter Motors, the dealership he'd inherited from his father, the source of his pride and identity, was failing. The house I'd grown up in, where I'd endured countless humiliations, was being foreclosed on. And I had the power to save it all with what would soon be pocket change to me. Or to let it burn. The universe had handed me the perfect revenge scenario, more perfect than anything I could have engineered. Richard Carter, who had mocked my business failures, was now facing his own. The man who had laughed at my pipe dreams was watching his life's work crumble. I opened my laptop and did what I did best. Research. Public records, business filings, credit reports. The picture that emerged confirmed my mother's assessment. Carter Motors was drowning in debt. The house had 2 mortgages against it. My father had made a series of increasingly desperate financial decisions, trying to keep his sinking ship afloat. By midnight, I had a complete picture of my father's financial ruin. By 1 in the morning, I had a plan. I picked up my phone and made a call that couldn't wait until business hours. Marcus? It's Millionaire. I need legal advice and I need absolute discretion. Thanksgiving at the Carter household had always been a production. My mother spent days preparing, the table set with her best china, the house filled with the competing aromas of turkey, stuffing, and pumpkin pie. It was a tradition steeped in Midwestern hospitality and familial obligation. But this year was different. I stood on the porch of my childhood home, dressed in a simple but exquisitely tailored black dress, a cashmere coat draped over my shoulders against the November chill. Through the windows, I could see the warm glow of the dining room, hear the murmur of voices, my extended family gathered for what might be the last holiday in this house. My finger hovered over the doorbell. 2 months had passed since my mother's desperate phone call. And that time, I'd sold Phoenix Closet to ALG for $120 million. The deal had made local headlines. My new position as Chief Authentication Officer came with a corner office in a Chicago skyscraper and a 7-figure salary. I'd also created a shell company, Carter Restoration LLC, through which I'd quietly purchased my father's dealership debt from the bank. I now effectively owned Carter Motors, though my name appeared nowhere in the paperwork. And yesterday, I'd received notification that the foreclosure on my parents' home would proceed as scheduled, unless the mortgage was brought current within 30 days. I pressed the doorbell. My mother answered, her face lighting up with surprise and relief. Millionaire? You came. She pulled me into a tight hug. I didn't think you would after everything. Happy Thanksgiving, Mom, I said, returning her embrace. She ushered me inside, taking my coat. Everyone's here, your aunts, uncles, cousins. And look at you. So elegant. Is that real cashmere? I nodded, mentally preparing for what was to come. The house looked the same, family photos on the walls, the same worn furniture, the same faded curtains. But there was a heaviness in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. Millionaire's here, my mother announced as we entered the dining room. Conversation stopped. All eyes turned to me, some widening in surprise, others narrowing with curiosity or judgment. My cousin Megan sat with her husband, their toddler in a high chair beside them. Uncle Phil and Aunt Claire were there, along with other extended family. And at the head of the table, my father. Richard Carter had aged in the 3 years since I'd seen him last. His hair was completely gray now, his face lined with stress. He looked smaller, somehow diminished. Well, he said, his voice gruff. Look who decided to grace us with her presence. Hello, Dad, I replied, my voice steady. It's been a while. An awkward silence fell. My mother rushed to fill it. Let me set another place. We're just about to serve the turkey. Richard, could you get another chair from the basement? I'm fine, I said. I can wait. My father pushed back from the table. No need. I'll get the chair. He stood, avoiding my eyes, and disappeared downstairs. As soon as he was gone, the questions began. Is it true you sold your company for over $100 million? Uncle Phil asked, incredulous. I saw you in Business Weekly, my aunt added. Such a lovely profile. Do you really have a penthouse downtown? This from Megan, her tone hovering between admiration and envy. I answered their questions politely but briefly, watching the doorway for my father's return. He emerged carrying a folding chair, which he placed at the far end of the table as distant from his seat as possible. Throughout dinner, I felt his gaze on me when he thought I wasn't looking. He said little, letting the conversation flow around him. My success hung in the air like an unwelcome guest, acknowledged by everyone except the man who had once mocked it as impossible. After the pumpkin pie was served, Uncle Phil raised his glass. I think we should toast our Millionaire. From what I hear, she's the most successful Carter in family history. Glasses raised around the table. All except my father's. Actually, I said, setting down my fork, I'd like to say something. The table fell silent. This was the moment I'd rehearsed countless times in my mind, the culmination of a revenge plot years in the making. I could humiliate him as he had humiliated me. I could reveal that I now owned his failing business, that I held the power to destroy everything he had built and valued. I looked at my father, saw the weariness in his eyes, the slump of his shoulders. He was already broken. What more could I possibly take from him? I wanted to share some news, I continued. Phoenix Closet has launched a new division, Phoenix Motors. We're acquiring struggling dealerships across the Midwest, restructuring them, and bringing them into the modern era with a focus on electric vehicles and sustainable transportation. Confusion rippled around the table. My father's head snapped up, his eyes suddenly alert. Our first acquisition is here in town, Carter Motors. My father's face drained of color. What are you talking about? He demanded. I've purchased your debt, Dad. As of yesterday, Phoenix Motors owns Carter Motors. I kept my voice calm, matter of fact. But I'm not here to shut you down. I'm offering you a partnership, a 51% stake for Phoenix, 49% for you. Full operational autonomy under the new brand. A fresh start with capital investment for renovations and inventory. The room was utterly silent now. Everyone stared at either me or my father, waiting to see how this unexpected drama would unfold. Why? He finally asked, his voice rough with emotion. Why would you do that? This was the question I'd anticipated, the one I'd struggled most to answer honestly, even to myself. Because regardless of our past, you're a good businessman who's been caught in a changing industry. Because the Carter name still means something in this town. And because I've learned that success isn't about proving people wrong, it's about doing what you believe is right. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. The paperwork's all here if you're interested. Along with this, I slid a check across the table. That's to bring the mortgage current. Consider it an advance on future profits. My father stared at the check, then at me. I saw a complex storm of emotions cross his face, pride, shame, relief, and something that might have been regret. I don't understand, he said quietly. After everything, after how I treated you. I know, I cut him off gently. But this isn't about that. It's not about the past at all. I stood up. Think about it. Call me when you decide. I thanked my mother for dinner, said brief goodbyes to my relatives, and walked out the front door before anyone could stop me. Outside, the night air was crisp and clean. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter than I had in years. My revenge wasn't what I'd originally planned. It wasn't destruction or humiliation. It was something far more powerful, mercy from a position of strength. The ability to help the man who had hurt me, not because he deserved it, but because I chose to. As I slid into my car, my phone rang. It was my father. Millionaire, he said, his voice unsteady. Don't leave yet. Please. Can we talk? I hesitated, then turned off the engine. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Face to face. Man to woman. There was a pause. Please. All right, I said. I'll come back inside. He was waiting on the porch when I returned, standing alone in the golden light spilling from the windows. He looked older, more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. I've been a fool, he said simply. A proud, stubborn fool. I said nothing, waiting. When you were growing up, I pushed you. Hard. Maybe too hard. He looked down at his hands, worker's hands, callous from years in the garage before he became the owner. I was afraid the world would chew you up and spit you out if you weren't tough enough. If you didn't have the right kind of success. And what's the right kind of success, Dad? He gestured vaguely. Steady. Practical. Things you can touch and see. Not dreams and schemes. Like Phoenix Closet? I asked quietly. He winced. I was wrong. About all of it. About you. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly for the first time. I'm proud of you, Millionaire. Prouder than I can say. Not because of the money or the fancy title. Because you built something real. Because you didn't give up. The words I'd once desperately craved now washed over me, meaningful but no longer necessary. I was proud of myself, and that mattered more. "Thank you," I said simply. "About your offer." He began. "You don't have to decide tonight." "No, I know what I want to say." He straightened his shoulders. "I'll accept, but with one condition. I don't want 49%. I want 10. Enough to stay involved, but not enough to hold you back. The dealership, Phoenix Motors, should be yours. You've earned it." I hadn't expected this. "Dad, that's not necessary." "It is to me." His eyes were damp, but his voice was firm. "It's time for me to step back and for you to step up. I may be an old fool, but I know a good business opportunity when I see one." For the first time in my adult life, I saw my father clearly, not as the towering figure of my childhood, nor as the cruel mocker of my dreams, but as a man. Flawed, proud, but capable of change. 15%, I countered. "And you stay on as a consultant for at least 2 years. Your experience matters." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "You always were a tough negotiator. I learned from watching you." He nodded slowly. 15% it is. He extended his hand. I looked at it for a moment, then stepped forward and hugged him instead. Stiffly at first, then with growing warmth as he returned the embrace. "Happy Thanksgiving, Dad," I whispered. "Happy Thanksgiving, Millionaire," he replied. "And thank you." As we walked back inside to rejoin the family, I realized that the revenge I dreamed of for so long had transformed into something unexpected: reconciliation. Not because I'd forgiven and forgotten, but because I'd grown strong enough to choose compassion over retribution. And somehow that felt like the greatest victory of all. 6 months later. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard Flight 1742 to Paris. Our flight time today will be approximately 8 hours and 20 minutes. I settled into my first-class seat, accepting a glass of champagne from the flight attendant. Through the window, I could see the Chicago skyline receding as the plane climbed into the clear May sky. Paris awaited, a week of meetings with potential European partners for Phoenix Closet, followed by 2 weeks of actual vacation. My first real break in nearly 4 years. My phone buzzed with a text from James, my executive assistant. Phoenix Motors Q2 projections just came in. Up 18% from forecast. Your father's EV initiative is working. I smiled, typing back. Tell him I said congratulations. He was right about the timing. The partnership with my father had evolved in unexpected ways. After our Thanksgiving reconciliation, he'd thrown himself into learning about electric vehicles with the same determination he'd once applied to traditional car sales. Phoenix Motors was now the top EV dealership in the region, with plans to expand to neighboring states. Our relationship had evolved too, not perfect, not always easy, but honest in a way it had never been before. We'd had hard conversations about the past, acknowledged the pain on both sides, and decided to build something new from the wreckage. The flight attendant came by to collect glasses before takeoff. "Traveling for business or pleasure?" she asked. "Both," I replied. "Business first, then pleasure." "The best combination," she agreed with a warm smile. "Let me know if you need anything during the flight." As the plane accelerated down the runway, I closed my eyes, feeling the familiar surge of takeoff. It reminded me of Phoenix Closet's trajectory, the initial struggle, the gathering momentum, and finally, the exhilarating ascent. At 33, I had achieved more than I'd ever dreamed possible. Financial security beyond imagination. Professional respect from an industry that had once seemed impenetrable. A reconciled relationship with my father. A growing philanthropic foundation focused on supporting young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Yet the greatest achievement wasn't any of these external markers of success. It was internal, the peace I'd found, the woman I'd become. The woman who had stood humiliated at that 4th of July barbecue no longer existed. In her place was someone stronger, wiser, more compassionate. Someone who understood that true success wasn't measured by bank accounts or revenge fulfilled, but by the life you built and the person you became along the way. As the plane leveled off above the clouds, I opened my laptop to review the presentation for my Paris meetings. The Phoenix Closet logo glowed on the screen, a stylized bird rising, wings outstretched. Rising not from the ashes of past failures or humiliations, but toward a future limited only by imagination and courage. This was my story now. Not a tale of revenge, but of transformation. Not of proving others wrong, but of proving myself right. and it was still just beginning.